Hey there! Welcome to the CMMC Compliance Guide Podcast. I'm Stacey.
And I'm Austin.
From Justice IT Consulting, where we help businesses like yours navigate CMMC and NIST 800-171 compliance. We're hired guns getting companies fast-tracked to compliance, but today we're here to give you all the secrets for free, so if you want to tackle it yourself, you're equipped to do so. Let's dive into today's episode and keep your business on track. Today, we're breaking down what we consider to be the top 12 essentials every contractor needs to be CMMC Level 2 compliant, especially if you're a small or mid-sized business. These are the requirements that most often make or break an audit. All right, Austin, before we get into the documents or tools, where does a company start with all of this?
Well, from our perspective, the only place to start properly is with a gaps assessment. Think of it like whenever you go to the doctor's office, the first thing they're going to do is some sort of test, whether it's a blood test is a great example to really, dive into the actual data, the tangible information, and show kind of what your status of health is. We consider the place to start for compliance and CMMC compliance specifically is to start with a gaps analysis, which is kind of like the blood test, for your company for compliance. And it shows exactly where you are on your journey to compliance. So where you are now and where you need to be. Simply stated, just the gaps, what you need to fill to actually be compliant. So that is the best place and an only place really to start in our opinion. You can do one informally, just kind of a gut check, but what we really, the only proper way to do it is to do a formal gaps assessment where you go check every single control and see where you're at on it, and actually generate the evidence for it as well. So that way you have a 100% like solid starting point of where you're at. And then that gaps analysis, that gaps assessment shows you what kind of program you need to build. Compliance management program is kind of what I call it. But what you need to build for your system security plan. So it's a starting point. And then you can start kind of filling in the holes. And with that baseline, you can create your SSP and your POA&M, your Plan of Action Milestones, your roadmap to get to compliance.
So once the gap assessment's done and you've got your diagnosis, what comes next?
Well, that's a great question. So the next step would be creating your system security plan and then defining your scope. And we feel like a lot of people skip this part and they just want to go straight to pulling a template down or, drafting their system security plan. And really, you can start it, but you can't get too far without defining your scope first. And that simply stated is figuring out where in your business CUI, controlled unclassified information, resides in your company. Typically, it's going to be downloaded from a customer portal, or emailed to you, unfortunately sometimes, or some other means. But you want to start with as soon as it gets into your network, your email systems, your computer. As soon as it gets to you, that's where scope starts. And then as it travels through the company, whether it's through quoting or through programming and out to the machine, if you're for example, a CNC machine shop or something like that, the scope will goes all the way out to the machines on the floor and in those people's hands, and ultimately to the finished part and your travelers and other paper items are also CUI as well. So you want to map that journey out. So you start with the journey, and then that will tell you kind of everything it touches throughout that journey. It defines the scope. So, for example, you might be thinking, well, that kind of sounds like my whole dang network, my whole company, right? Well, it's not necessarily because your front office person or your accountant isn't necessarily touching programming files or customer requests for quotes or data coming in or anything like that. So you really want to carve all those people that aren't touching that stuff out. And that is what's defining scope. So, and you just draw that, that line, and then you've got your scope, and then you can start writing your system security plan. And your system security plan is basically your playbook on how you're going to tackle compliance and satisfy all 110 controls and to be compliant.
So as you mentioned, the gap assessment shows what's missing, and the SSP shows how you'll meet the controls. So where does the plan of action and milestones fit in?
Yeah. So plan of action milestones, if we're going with a doctor analogy here, and the blood test would be essentially your prescription, right? So, you've got this problem on your blood test, for example, and so you get these pills. In the compliance, using that analogy, moving it towards compliance, this would be defining things like I have to implement multi-factor authentication on this computer or this network or this cloud application, or we have CUI in this cloud application, so it needs to be a FedRAMP or something like that. So it's simply just kind of a prescriptive list of things that you need to do to satisfy all the controls listed out in CMMC and the NIST 800-171, how you're going to satisfy them. So it's simply essentially the POA&M, Plan of Action Milestones, is the treatment plan. It's the prescription of all the things that you have to do that you're not doing now to satisfy compliance. So that way you can then get compliance. And to add on to that, that POA&M is going to list, you're going to have to list out your deficiencies. So, and then what you're doing and who is responsible for fixing them. So, and then what your target dates are. And Brooke's not here today. He's our resident compliance expert, so I won't speak to the particulars about that. We're going to kind of keep it broad today within my wheelhouse. But there is a limit to the dates that you can put on POA&Ms now. So you can't just simply say, we're going to fix this in, 3 years. You pretty much need to get compliant ASAP these days. So you can't just perpetually have things on the POA&M just sitting around saying, yeah, I'll get around to it. That doesn't work anymore. It never really did, but it was used that way by some people a lot of the times. So just something to watch out for there.
So Austin, at what point do written policies come into play?
Yeah. So you're going to have usually how your policies, procedures, and your SSP are written is going to be you're going to have your system security plan, which is kind of your overarching framework for stating how you're going to be compliant basically to your assessor. You kind of want to write it mapped out to the controls themselves, and then essentially tell the assessor how you're satisfying that control. And then all of your policies basically support that. So you don't want to necessarily have, for example, your entire incident response plan written inside your SSP. Now, some people do that. There's nothing saying that you have to do it this way or that way. But we really like to stick with best practices, things that we know assessors are looking for. We're basically shooting for, the tried and true path that we know. And we've been told gets you to a compliant situation. If we're looking at that as the goal, which is typically what we counsel our customers to shoot for, is having the SSP as the overarching kind of framework, and then all of your supporting policies like your patching policy, your incident response plan, your awareness training, all that stuff is basically supporting policies to the system security plan. So that's kind of where it comes into play. So they're all going to be different documents that you kind of package together and support each other, and that's how we do it. And another real important note here, while we're talking about documentation and policies and SSP and all of that, is that these policies and the SSP have to be things, they have to say what you're actually doing. So you can't just have some template that you've downloaded and put your name on and changed a few things on. You need to say, what tools you're using, how it's satisfying controls, and how you're doing things in those tool sets. Keeping it way too general is not good. Also, being way too specific is not good. So there's you want to stay in the middle, in a happy medium there. But the major point I'm trying to really put across here is that you really need to have custom drafted documentation based on exactly what you're doing, not something that's off the shelf that maybe you got from a vendor or that's giving you one of the tools that you're using for compliance. Because if you're using that, then it's a good place to start, but you then need a custom draft on top of it because it's not going to address all the other things in your environment. And you have to do that, and you have to add it to whatever template or documentation that you currently have. So only point I'm trying to get across there is that you really need to make sure it says exactly what you're doing, and it's specific to you.
So pivoting a little bit onto multi-factor authentication, why is this one such a big deal?
Well, this one's such a big deal because it's commonly misunderstood, and it's typically under-implemented. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times people will be like, oh, well, I have it turned on my email, so I'm set. And it's like, well, yeah, you have it set for your email, but what about anywhere else that you have CUI, and that you're accessing it remotely? And an important note to keep in the back of your head is that remotely, in terms of CMMC Level 2, even means across your local network. And what I mean by that is if I'm sitting in my office here and I'm connecting to a computer across, just 10 foot over, and I'm not sitting in front of it, for example, a server or something, or a QuickBooks computer or something like that, that has to have multi-factor authentication. So if you're not accessing the data directly on your computer that's sitting in front of you, it has to have multi-factor authentication. And so that's one that people get tripped up on a lot because it's one that's kind of specific to CMMC compliance because it's not a lot of other people require it that way. So it's kind of a special. It's not commonly adopted that way, I should say. So it's misunderstood, and then it's typically not set up on all the tool sets. So it's going to be anywhere that you have CUI, and in your scope, you need to have two-factor authentication turned on. So if you're using first, you shouldn't be using commercial. You should be using GCC or GCC High for Microsoft 365 or email. So that needs to be turned on. And then if you have your backups hosted somewhere, then that needs to have multi-factor authentication, right? If you have a cloud app, the cloud app needs to be most likely FedRAMP in most scenarios, compliant or otherwise compliant, and that needs to have multi-factor authentication turned on. And the list goes on. So typically it's a big deal because it's misunderstood where it needs to be implemented. And I just gave a couple examples about that, and then that it's also under implemented, and people don't really truly understand the number of things they have to turn it on. And that's why we really counsel people to start with scope first, because if you really do map out that data you get from the customer and who it touches and what programs it's touching as it travels through your business, and you actually talk to the people doing it. You don't just report on what you know, because you may not know necessarily, for example, all the programs your programmer is using all the time. You want to go ask them, okay, whenever you get this and interview them, what do you do with it? What programs do you use? Where does it go? And then you just sketch that out in Visio or on the whiteboard or PowerPoint or wherever you want to put it. Then you've kind of got more or less a starting point for a list of applications and computers and servers that you need to turn multi-factor authentication on. So, and then of course you need to have all of the evidence that you have it turned on when it's time for assessment, but that's a whole nother deal. So,
what about access control? What are assessors looking for there?
Yeah, so access control, it it can sound real complicated, but basically what is trying to be accomplished is people and programs and software, by the way, or service accounts as well, like administrator accounts or your scanner, printer, and stuff like that also need to be thought about. But the easy examples are people, right? And so the goal is to control the access that people or your resources have in a manner that is appropriate to the job function that they are executing, and in a way that it gives them just what they need to get their job done, but nothing more. So the concept for that is called least privilege. So, if you've got Betty Sue, the bookkeeper, right? She has no need to access drawing files. So you do not give her that privilege. Now, is she going to do anything with them nefarious, or, it's not HR files. It's not, profit and loss statements. Well, I guess she's the bookkeeper. She's seen that anyway, but, it's not information that typically you would be concerned about, protecting, in the sense of like HR data or, very sensitive information. Typically businesses view it as like, well, that's our main deliverable. Everyone sees how the sausage is made, right? Mm-hmm. But really, from a compliance perspective, you want to restrict that person's access to whatever duty they have, and then you also need to be able to restrict and control accounts as people come and go. So another piece of that is you need to review. As you hire and fire people, those need to be, either enabled or disabled or what have you. And then you also need to have some sort of cadence of checking to make sure that nothing was missed as well. So like a catch-all. And so the goal of access control is to contain the scope of what people can touch in the business, making sure that it's only related to the job function, and secondarily, that there's nothing hanging out there that could be used by nefarious actors, that, some unused account that hadn't been logged into in 3 years that a hacker could then use to get into an old password, then jump on another one of your systems because that was open. So again, we're trying to keep things pretty broad here, not get too specific today, but that's kind of an example of what access control is.
Let's pivot over to device protection. What is to be expected there? Yeah,
so the highlights for device control typically are going to be endpoint protection, patch management, things like that. And so you really need to have a modern antivirus, endpoint detection system, patch management processes and procedures, and looking for stuff like 0 days and vulnerability risks and everything else that can be out there. The main goal is, of course, making sure you have the evidence that you've been doing this, right? So you always need to generate that. And then you need to make sure that all those tools are updated to a very reasonable time frame. Things can't be out of date for 2 months. It needs to be within a week or two or something like that. Same thing for patch management. And if there's a computer update that you're not applying right now because there's a lot of issues with it for Windows drivers or something, then there needs to be a reason for it, and then that needs to be weighed against whatever risk it's patching. So if it's a big security vulnerability that it's patching but it breaks something, then that needs to be taken into account, right? And so the main things for device protection that you'll see that need to be addressed are going to be endpoint detection, antivirus, patch management, things like that.
All right, Austin. So what about incident response? How detailed does that need to be?
So pretty detailed. And I say pretty detailed because most everyone, whenever we're talking to them, says, "Yeah, we've got that." And then you ask them, "Well, is it documented?" And most of them say no. And if it is, it's not. It's lacking. We'll just say so. Um, Even if you have something that's conceptual, or everyone knows, it's just general knowledge, it still needs to be written down because an assessor doesn't care. And like we say all the time, that's where the buck stops. That's who we're, shooting to please. And so all this other stuff doesn't matter. We're just trying to make the assessors happy to get you a certification, right? And so that's the goal. And so it needs to be documented. It needs to be written out, what you're doing, how you're doing it. And it needs to address most common scenarios. Obvious ones are like you've had a breach, and then you also need to put in there reporting timeframes, where you're going to report to, who's going to report it, and then one thing that we always ask and counsel when we ask about incident response plan or helping someone draft theirs. Is the documentation's great, but you also need to make sure that you go get registered and get set up to report to the government. Because if you don't have that set up ahead of time, you could breach your reporting time frame because it takes a while to get the proper certificates and a mechanism to report those incidents when they happen. And that's just a completely unnecessary situation to be in. It just takes a little bit of preparation, set it up, a little bit of a headache working on their websites to get it set up. So make sure you go do that. I think it's DC3 is what they've named it to now. They just changed systems. So go get that set up if you haven't, and then draft your incident response plan is typically what we counsel. But, it should have clear roles, communications and timelines and what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and what time frames you're going to do it.
So there may be some misconceptions that training would be the easy part of this. Why do so many people fail around this portion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this is typically going to be evidence, right? So a lot of time there will be training done, or people will go use the DD provided training, but it's not documented, and then there's no policy around it. So there's no way to prove that you have a system to the assessor, or that you've been completing it. So you really need a couple core pieces for awareness and training, and that is a policy saying what training you do, how you do it, and then you basically who's doing it, and then you need to do those things, and then you need to document all the completions of the training. So this can be as simple as having everyone come in for a training day, and you have people sign off on paper, and you scan it in, and you have an archive file of everyone attesting that they did the training, and y'all watched a video together or whatever. Or you could use some cybersecurity awareness tools and training, which for the price point that's what we typically recommend. Honestly, we for a lot of our customers, they typically will opt to use KnowBe4. And it's nice because it's got a lot of other features, as well as some learning modules that you can put your training in, and then they do quizzes, and then there's all the documentation, evidence of completion dates, what their scores were, and so you can just simply have the results of that for the assessor, and then you don't have to have a system you have to manage. All you have to do is follow up with the people that don't do the training and say, get it done, but you have to write it up. And typically it's not written up. And then most of the time, the evidence is completely non-existent. So someone, you can't just we'll pick on Bobby Sue again. You can't just pull her in the office and say, tell the assessor you did your training last year. It doesn't work. You need to have it documented before they get there. So
moving on to data handling, What are the requirements here?
Yeah. So the big piece of this is going to be your asset list or your asset inventory. And it needs to be pretty exhaustive. And typically, people have the computers and the servers listed that have that hold COI, process, stores, transmits, PSTs. The rule we like to rule of thumb we like to tell everyone, if it processes, stores, or transmits COI, it needs to be on that asset inventory list. So even if it's not holding your COI data all the time, if it traverses it in any way, it needs to be on that asset list because that is then in scope. So, people typically leave out a lot. Like I said, the laptops, the workstations, the servers, those are easy. People, they're like, yeah, they're there. But then people forget the USB drives. They forget the operational technology, things like CNC machines, etc., and all the other things. And so it needs to be a completely exhaustive list, because if the assessor spots some technology or assets that CUI somehow traverses or is stored on and it's not on that list, then that's a big black eye in the assessment. So that's probably the biggest thing about data handling that we see people get tripped up on. The other is removable drives, things like USB drives, hard drives, stuff like that. Those need to be inventoried. They need to be tracked. They need to be typically serialized, FIPS encrypted, and the easiest thing, especially in a manufacturing environment, is to use especially if you're dealing with operational technology like CNC machines. It's not always as easy as just plugging into a computer and typing a password in. They have a fit sometimes with working with things. So we like to suggest the thumb drives that have the actual like punch button codes on the outside, because when you punch that button in, it basically decrypts it instead of your computer having to do it. So whatever you're plugging it into, it just seems like a regular USB drive at that point. And so it works a lot better in scenarios where you're not dealing with just like the latest and greatest computers that have all the features and are able to read things correctly. People typically don't serialize those correctly. They don't label them correctly. Those all have to be inventoried, labeled, and tracked as well. So that's another common piece. And then disposal as well. So whenever one of those USB drives dies, or a computer that was in scope that was a programmer's, for example, that had CUI data on it, there needs to be a process for which that data is destroyed and that computer is disposed of. Because otherwise, if you don't, then you've just say put that computer out to recycling or sold on an eBay or something, then you've just null and voided your entire compliance program because you just sent COI to eBay or something, like that. So it's so the disposal and sanitation of computers and media and thumb drives is really important as well. People don't typically think about it, but it takes some management, some systems, but it's at the end of the day a pretty easy one to solve.
Moving on to encryption, which is a topic that seems to trip people up a lot. What's the rule of thumb there?
Yeah, encryption does trip people up quite a bit. So, and there's some gotchas there as well. One that we like to see a lot, we don't like to see it a lot. We just happen to see it a lot because we work with a lot of small and mid-sized manufacturers. And a lot of those manufacturers use QuickBooks, even if they have a nice fancy ERP system that they're running their shop through. Oftentimes, especially if you're outsourcing some of your accounting or whatnot, it's easier to run some of the books just through QuickBooks. And most of those ERPs have QuickBooks backed in the connection, even if they have an accounting system built in. So And typically the easiest thing to do is put that QuickBooks computer or server on the same network as your where your CUI is. And so you'd asked about what trips people up for FIPS, or excuse me, for encryption is because the compliance requires a specific type of encryption. It's called FIPS-validated encryption. It's a special government version, and just like everything that's a special government version, most things don't work on it correctly. So it really limits the number of things that you can put in scope. For example, QuickBooks, you can't put it in scope. It needs to be on your own. Like we typically tell people to put it on the level 1 network, segment the network, put it off over here on one of the other computers where it can't talk to the programmers and the CNC machines, and that typically will solve it. But you can't just have it all in the same environment as everything else. So because FIPS encryption breaks things when you implement it. So that the most common scenario is that people have encryption turned on, but it's not FIPS validated encryption. So that's obviously won't work because it's not the right kind. Mm-hmm. And then when they do turn it on, things start breaking. Or the tools that you're using to satisfy some of the other controls stop working as well. So backups are very common. One where there's not a lot of backup solutions out there that are kind of all-in-one backup solutions that have FIPS encryption, the ability to use FIPS encryption, FIPS validated. And then if they have that, then they're not FedRAMP. And then so you can't use them. So the rule of thumb is making sure you have FIPS validated encryption turned on everything, in scope, that's in scope. And then if you're using a tool that you don't want to stop using, then put it somewhere else because if it breaks with FIPS encryption.
So Austin, how deep do contractors need to go with logging?
Yeah. So logging is one of those that, again, we're sticking with high level broad strokes today. So, I'm going to miss a lot of important things here, but pretty deep is the answer. So everything needs to be logged for the most part. For example, if you're using Office 365, Microsoft 365, whatever you want to call it, they keep changing the names. You need to have a license that allows you to be able to look at the logs for it. So we typically recommend implementing a SIEM, whatever you call it. People call it different things. SOC as a service is another product you can buy that includes a SIEM a lot of the times. But it is by far the easiest way to implement this control. It does not require one. But as Brooke likes to say, it describes one, right? Mm-hmm. So, we generally recommend go get you a SIEM, implement it, and then make sure that it is capable of looking at all proper data sources. Common ones are going to be your firewall. It needs to be able to connect your firewall. Your firewall needs to log things correctly. And then it needs to pull it over into its own system and protect those logs. So it needs to have its own repository. And then, if you have CUI in your email or Microsoft 365, that needs to be able to be logged. Your computers, your servers, those need to be logged. Those are all common areas to log. Beyond that, you also have to make sure that all your time clocks sync well. So, which is not one that people often think about. They're like, okay, I got a SIEM, SOC as a service, and I'm all good. But whenever you have say you get breached, and you need to make a timeline of the breach, you need to make sure that all your times are matching up correctly. Otherwise, your timeline's not going to make sense. or you're going to miss things. So if server 1, it says it's 5 p.m., but your email system says it's 5:05, and you get breached at 4:59, you're going to be real confused when you look through all the logs if all the times aren't syncing up correctly. So a part that people generally miss is making sure that their time clocks are syncing up correctly. And then you want to use a trusted source. Always benefits you to use a government time clock. And so if you're out there, you're a manufacturer, you're a quality guy or something like that, and you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's fine. You shouldn't. Your IT guy probably knows what I'm talking about. So you need to make sure that there's an authoritative source for your times, for all your servers and your systems, and that they're using that and that it lines up. Because otherwise, even if you had the control implemented, but your times don't match up, again, black eye.
Last but not least, ongoing assessments. Can you enlighten us there?
Things change is the easiest way to describe the need for ongoing assessments, right? And so your assessor's going to come in and they're going to make sure that you're following the rules for everything. But they want to really make sure that you're doing this stuff on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis. And so part of that is doing regular assessments of yourself and your own network and systems. So that way you catch things before they do. And really the more important thing that they're trying to shoot for is that you catch it before a hacker does, or another nation state, or, before you get caught, in a vulnerable position, and someone gets to exploit it. Mm-hmm. So, easiest way to think about it, I like my analogies. We moved away from the doctor office. Now we're moving to going to bed at night. I don't know about everyone else, but whenever I go to bed, I go make sure my garage is shut, make sure my doors are locked, mm-hmm. make sure my security system's turned on. And that is essentially the same thing that you're doing for risk assessments, vulnerability assessments. Whenever you do them internally, you have to do them on a certain cadence. You have to do them frequently so you catch those things. Software changes, updates have vulnerabilities. People make changes on computers, much like if you got people coming in and out of your house all day. You don't know who went through the door last if they locked it. Same thing for your computers. If someone changed a configuration or a piece of software got updated, you need to go then double check those things occasionally and make sure that all your T's have been crossed, your I's have been dotted, the door's been locked, the window's been shut, and all your patches were installed and all that. So that's the goal. It's a double check. And you have to show that you've done it, have the evidence for it, and of course, actually do it.
So before we round out today's episode, we have a listener question on episode 35. At Caesar Nay King asked, since we talked about on that episode, we said secure links via email are not really adequate because of commercial Microsoft 365. So their question is, are we suggesting that because of potential Microsoft Outlook vulnerabilities as a potential point of risk, or are we also suggesting that the customer portal via a web browser is a superior method to digital transfer of CUI?
Yeah, great question. Caesar, is that right?
Yes, Caesar Naked.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you. Keep them coming. The issue with the core issue that we're talking about there is CUI and how it has to be treated. Not necessarily problems with Office or vulnerabilities, but compliance says you have to protect CUI in certain ways. And the commercial version of Microsoft is not sufficient because it doesn't meet the requirements. So that's why you see people wanting to use GCC High. So that is simply the reason why a secure link through commercial is not sufficient. It's because that commercial doesn't meet the necessary controls to protect CUI. secure link should be used to transmit COI. And yes, I always do. Typically, most of our customers, their customers, are going to be larger primes or the government itself, and they're going to have their own portal that they want you to transmit data in and out of to communicate with them. And we certainly recommend doing that because that's their systems, they're your customer, and it doesn't abdicate your responsibility necessarily, but it's something you don't have to take care of, right? Mm-hmm. So because as soon as you interact with that portal, usually in the means of downloading it, then as soon as it touches and you download it into your downloads folder is in scope, your computer's in scope then. So the point of that I'm just trying to say is that the best thing to do is use their approved portals because they're supposed to be compliant to transmit data to them. Best way to do it. Because then you don't have to, one, provide your own secure means, so you could save some money. Chances are not all your customers are going to, have a completely great way to share data. So you might have to invest in a secure way to share COI anyway. GCC high is a good way to do it. We like Prevail a lot of times. Seems to fit the bill for a lot of people. There's other things. But I think that ultimately answers the question. I think maybe a little bit more than Caesar bargained for, but here we go.
Nonetheless, it was great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you have any questions about what we covered, reach out to us. We're here to help fast track your compliance journey. Text, email, or call in your questions and we'll answer them for free here on the podcast. You can find our contact info at CMMCComplianceGuide.com. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, stay compliant, stay secure, and make sure to subscribe.